All right, this is a disclaimer. This video is for someone that has built a lot of radios from scratch, not kits. And I'm going to tell you about stuff that if you ask me a question about it, I'm going to basically tell you go read up on it. First thing I'll do is I'll reference you. This is what you want to look for. It's not this. Normally this is in yellow on the internet. How to build advanced shortwave receivers by R.A. Penfold. All right, this guy explains the basics. He also mentions you don't need a dual conversion receiver under 20 megacycles. Now, there are a lot of dual conversion radios in the past for below 20 megahertz. And most of them have a band that's above, so I guess they leave that feature for all the bands. Now, what you want to do, besides this book by Penfold, you want to get a schematic for a Collins R388. Also, you want to get a schematic for a Heathkit SW7800. You should also go look at other schematics of other radios that are digital and understand how they are able to put digits, a digital readout on the radio. Now, here's what happened. Originally, I showed you that I built the Collins R388 basic circuit using a NE602. And then when I went to use the digital readout, it wasn't making any sense. I could take a frequency and run it through my calculator and then know what the output frequency of the mixer was. And then I'd put a radio on that frequency and I would get it. But what I wasn't noticing was the output of the mixer. There's two mixers. One of the mixers was an inverse. So what an inverse is, you take a low frequency and go through the mixer and it becomes a high frequency. The high frequency goes through the mixer, becomes a low frequency. So the radio band becomes backwards. Now, if you were to use a dial and you were to calibrate the dial, you wouldn't notice that the frequencies, instead of going from low to high, is going from high to low. But as soon as you throw a digital frequency counter that you get on eBay, one of these things, let's see if it's in the frame, it doesn't make any sense. Now there's an offset in here, and that's to offset the IF frequency, but you can't do an inverse of the frequencies. You can't make it work backwards. So when it gets 10 megacycles, it thinks it's getting 3 megacycles. You could do it for one frequency, but then the next frequency, it's wrong. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking. So I go looking and I say, all right, I just changed the crystal on the first mixer to below the frequency I want. See, you really want the frequency of your oscillator to be above and give you a product, all right, that's just lower. So in other words, you have a incoming frequency into the mixer, the oscillator is above, and it produces a lower frequency, which would be your IF. Now, when you do dual conversions, that operation happens twice. And if you're getting confused, you need to do some reading. So I'm sitting there and laying there and thinking about it. So anyway, I changed the crystal to a lower frequency, and it did work. But I noticed that the crystal I was using, its harmonics were all the way up the band. So I'm like, that's why they use a crystal that's above the frequency. So when you're in that band, that oscillator is above, and you don't pick the oscillator up of the radio. So I'm like, oh, we're right back to square zero. So I'm laying in bed night after night thinking about it. So then I come up with this idea that go look and see how other people do it. And they use real high frequencies and all kinds of schemes. Well, the problem with that is your oscillators at the higher frequencies are going to drift more than if you use lower frequency oscillators. The whole idea of the Collins R388 is their tuned oscillator is a big ferrite chunk or log, and coil. And in other words, they have it set up that the oscillator barely drifts at all. That's way back. And they come in and they pre-scale the incoming frequencies. And they go through an oscillator and mixer, and they get inverted. The band gets inverse, not inverted, inverse. And that doesn't affect them because they go over to an oscillator, the one that's got the big chunk of ferrite, and they put a scale on it, and they calibrate it. So when you're turning that scale and you're going from 5 megacycles, actually you'd be going from 3 to 4 on the one band. So you go from like CHU Canada at 3.33 up to a ham radio operator maybe on 75 meters, 3885, and it works perfectly. But if you were to put a frequency counter on that radio, it won't work because the dial is inverse. So here's what I came up with. You come in with your incoming frequency and you go to an NE602, piece of cake, right? The NE602 has a crystal oscillator on it right away. It's a fixed crystal oscillator. Now in this case, this mess, I'm using 9 megacycles. So the incoming frequency, let's make it 3 so I could do the math in my head on the fly, 71 years old. 3 megacycles comes in, it hits the mixer, it gets mixed, so it's 3 from 9 megacycles. So 3 from 9 is 6. All right, so that's inverse. Now you take the 6 and put it into the next NE602 with the same oscillator. You use the same oscillator crystal for the second one. That's what this is down in here. And it now bumps it back up. So now you've double converted the frequency, and now it's back up to what it's supposed to be. Then you go over here to another NE602 that works with your frequency counter. So the two NE602s at the front convert the frequency twice. This converts it the third time. So this is a triple conversion receiver. All right, you don't even need that at this frequency, but I'm just telling you that's what you're looking at. Now, your frequency counter, your offset is 0.455 for the 455 strip that I used, and the problem goes away. So I don't know if anybody ever did this before, but it's an inverse mixer. In other words, we mix the frequency twice, we bring it in, we mix it to make it to convert it that makes it a super hat radio. Then we convert it back, and that makes it a dual conversion radio. Then we convert it one more time to 455. That makes it a triple tune converter. Okay, so this little circuit's triple tune. Doesn't need to be triple tune. It is a little sloppy, but I wanted to see if it would work. See, I'm all about getting an idea and actually doing it and making it work and staying with it until it works. See, the bullshit artists, they come up with an idea in their head and then they actually tell you they built it and got it working. And I bumped into these guys, and then I'd go home and I'd spend weeks. A lot of it was the TV decoders, and they were wrong, they were lying. And I would get it working, and then they'd want my schematic. And like a fool, I used to give them the schematic. And then what they would do is they'd take the schematic, redraw it in their handwriting, put their name on it, and then pass it around. I learned a lot in life, but I talk about what I'm working on or what I have done. Other people talk about stuff they've never done. They make up stuff, and it becomes very confusing for me because I take people on their word. What they tell me, I believe them. I'm getting all kinds of problems with people. I think I might have told you, the one neighbor asked me about putting a slab under his shed, and should he get a permit? And it turned out he lied to me. He built a big cement deck in the back of his house without a permit. Now the one neighbor is taking him to court. Well, anyway, even now, I'm a very naive person. I trust what people tell me. But I wanted to show you this. I lost a lot of sleep on this because I kept saying, well, there's got to be a digital readout on these radios. How are they doing it? Well, they're using 10 megacycles, and they got the frequency counter on the first mixer, and they have an offset on it. So when you're tuning to say 3 megacycles, and then going to from 3.33, which would be CHU counter, to 3.85, you're really up in the 10 megacycle band. Your oscillator is up that high, mixing it down, and your frequency counter is totally fooled. It's happy. It goes between 3.33 and 3.885. And then the magic happens after that. It's the dual conversion happens after that. And it doesn't matter if it becomes inverse. And that's the way it works. All right. So I also wanted to say the Heathkit SW7800 has no real front end on the radio. And go read the reviews on it. And I'm sitting there like, how could this radio be such a piece of junk? Well, there's no front end. The SDR radios, software-defined radios, they have no real front end. They have a couple little chokes, one little choke for each band. And as you go up in frequency, the SDRs work better because the frequencies of each station are further apart. But SDR radios were not meant to do shortwave band. And one guy actually spelled it out real quick. He says SDR radios were developed so you could watch television on your computer. And then little by little, people changed the software so it could do other frequencies. But trying to make it go down in frequency and do like the AM broadcast band, it will pick up the stronger stations. And go read up on this stuff, and you'll see the people, they get into an area, and the guy that's bullshitting them, oh, SDR radios are really good. They've improved them a lot. They've added shield. They're still crap. They'll always be crap because when you put a front end on the radio, you really up your game. You got to change the tune of the front end through the software, and you got to put those parts in the radio. See, the SDRs, they just bring the antenna basically straight into the first mixer, and there's so many things that go wrong. If you get really into radio, you can't fix something after the horse has left the barn. Closing the door doesn't help. So in other words, the frequency comes into an SDR. It gets into the circuitry. Once that signal is in there, you get all kinds of distortions and everything. And you won't notice it up on the police bands or the aircraft band, but you will notice all the problems of intermode, phantom frequencies. You'll find that down in the shortwave band because there's no front end on the radio. And I just want to show you my inverse mixer. You use two mixers. You mix it down, mix it back up, go over to your third mixer, and you got your frequency counter on there. Everything will be honky-dory. Build a nice case for it. I had to get this out of my head. That's how I work. And I've been reading about the way my brain works. You get obsessed with certain problems, and that's what I do. I get an idea in my head, and I start working on it. And it's not nothing's really impossible if you stay with it long enough. But you make yourself crazy. And I'm like, why didn't they ever come up with an inverse mixer? Why didn't they ever come up with a frequency counter that could do inverse? Why didn't they? And of course, the price goes way up, and they realize that the average person is not going to go in these areas. I go in these areas, and I ask why. How come? Let's look at it. Let's go look at it honestly. So I recommend this guy here, and he explains the two different. It's Penfold, Penfold. I think he's British. Oh, and if you see the schematics of this, don't bother me. Hey, I was looking at the Penfold, and I can't locate those coils. I've read those messages on the internet. There's this thing called toroid coils, and learning to wind your own coils. Sitting down here are two toroid coils, right down here, and this is a front end on this. And I can bypass this front end by moving this jumper, and I can go tune front end, two coil tune front end, or one coil tune front end, just by mixing this. And I can see all the happy horse shit that happens when you don't put a tune front end on a radio. It's not my first day at the rodeo, but there's people that argue with me because they don't know enough. The more you know what can go wrong. I think that's it. All right, that's it.